I'm honored to be here, and thank you all for being here. Thank you for coming. So will the new Jewish leaders please stand up? Will you? Stand up. Come on. Everyone should be standing up, right? Yeah. Okay, all right. Okay, that's the topic. Thank you. Thank you. But you reminded me of a little story about this multi-millionaire who loved to collect alligators. In fact, in his backyard, he had a pool of alligators, and each time he purchased or was given a new alligator, he would put him in that pool. One day he had a big party in his backyard, and he told the many people there, look, I have an idea. I have this pool of alligators, and I also have just one beautiful daughter. Whoever can jump in this pool of alligators and swim from one end to the other will either get my daughter to marry or $1 million. Obviously no one jumped. Come on, who can jump? After a few good minutes, they hear a splash in the water, see someone scrambling, trying to swim to the other end. He makes it miraculously, comes out unhurt, and the millionaire is stunned. He said, wow, how'd you do that? I never thought anyone could do that. And I have to keep my end of the bargain, so what do you want? Do you want my daughter, or do you want $1 million? He says to him, like, I don't want your daughter, I don't want $1 million, I want the idiot that pushed me in the pool just now. But it's the big question, who can seize the moment? Who can jump in that pool and lead? And I will dare ask you to join me in studying for just a moment a powerful phrase in the Midrash that speaks of 3 storms that befell history. There were 3 storms. If you learn the Bible, you know just of 3 storms that the Bible speaks of. The first one is the storm of Elijah the prophet. The second one is the storm that we read about every Yom Kippur, the storm of Jonah. And the third one is the storm of Job, the book of Job. These 3 storms, the Midrash tells us, are about 3 people who also were pushed in that pool of leadership, yet could not heed the call. What are those 3 storms about? So let's go into those biblical episodes. The first one, that's the storm of Elijah the prophet, takes us to the 9th century BCE, many years ago. And Elijah the prophet was the prophet of the land of Israel. In fact, he was a revered prophet, but not always listened to. And he tried in the time of peril for the Jewish people, in a time in which promiscuity and idol worship was filling this land. He tried to speak to the heart of the people and awaken them to return to their Father in heaven. But Elijah the prophet at one point just could not take it anymore. He had received a message from the queen of the land that could not stand the prophet simply because he stood for everything that she did not stand for. He stood for purity, she stood for impurity. She sent him a message one day, Elijah, tomorrow you will be caught and hung in public. Elijah the prophet flees to the mountains. If you recall that scene, it's a very powerful scene in the Bible. He's hiding behind a tree in the desert, in the vastness of the mountains, and he simply gives up. All of a sudden, a terrible storm conquers that desert, befalls upon him, and he hears God's voice saying, Elijah, what are you doing here? Didn't I send you to speak to my people? And Elijah says, yes, but your people are stubborn. Your people simply would not listen to me, and I found myself right now alone in this fight. Alone. God continues with that storm. He thinks it's a storm of fire. Then he thinks it's a storm of wind. He realizes that it's a storm that is rooted in one small, still voice. But that's the first storm we encounter. The second storm is the storm of Jonah, as mentioned. Jonah is a famous story in which Jonah the prophet was also sent to Nineveh. Nineveh is a city that today is probably located in Turkey, somewhere in Turkey. He was sent to that city also by God in order to ensure that the people return to God. You see, these people were also corrupt, and they were engrossed in many impure things, including murder, by the way. And Nineveh was sent in order to truly awaken that city. What happens next is nothing less than astonishing. Jonah boards the ship towards that city, and he says, no, I don't feel like going. Remember that? I don't feel like going. What happens? A huge storm again hits that ship. People of the ship can't understand what's happening. Why is this? I mean, we thought that the waves were calm. We thought that the weather was beautiful. What happened? And they ask, is anyone doing anything wrong? Does anyone come to the ship in a corrupt way? Jonah says, it's probably me. God is sending me to the city, but I've given up. So they take Jonah, to make a long story short, and they throw him off board. He's swallowed by the whale. Remember that famous thing? Okay, swallowed by the whale. And make sense of that, I don't know. Swallowed by the whale, it probably wasn't a whale. It probably wasn't a whale. Whales can't swallow big things. Whales have very small necks, biologically. So it probably wasn't a whale, but maybe a shark. Maybe. But in any case, the storm goes away, the ship is saved, but Nineveh, for 3 days, he's contemplating, should I, shouldn't I, should I, shouldn't I? He's still alive. And finally, the fish vomits him up, and he goes to Nineveh, heeds the call, and saves the city of Nineveh. In fact, he saves the city of Nineveh with just 5 words. He comes to the city of Nineveh and he tells the people, which is quite amazing, right? Because it took Moses 40 years to finally somehow penetrate the hearts of our nation. They were rebelling non-stop. 40 years. Here comes Jonah, and with 5 words, he changes an entire city. How do you do that? He tells them, in another 40 days, Nineveh is destroyed if you don't return. And they return to God. How do you do that? How do you explain that? Moses couldn't do it in 40 years, and here comes a man who does it in 3 seconds, 5 words. Think about this. I'm not going to, maybe the answer is simply that you see, they weren't slaves. I'll tell you this also. I think that Moses was leading, let's not forget, a nation of Jews. And when you have a nation of Jews, you have millions of opinions and millions more of arguments. Nineveh was a different story. But in any case, that was another storm. The third storm is the storm of Job. Job, if you recall the story, the book of Job, which is truly a tragic book. But Job is faced also with a storm. He's a wealthy man who lives very comfortably. In fact, he's a happy man. That's how the Bible calls him. But all of a sudden, the storm comes and destroys everything he possesses. Everything. Everything. Not just his house, not just his possessions, but even his family relatives. Everything. The Talmud, trying to understand why this happened to Job, can only relate a story. The story that he tells is that Job, where did Job come from? Who was Job? And concludes that Job was an advisor to Pharaoh. Pharaoh, the king who enslaved the Jewish people in Egypt. And when Pharaoh wanted to launch that decree of destruction, he consulted with 3 of his advisors. One of them was Job. The other one was Jethro, who became the father-in-law of Moses. And the third one was Bilam, that prophet who tried to curse the Jewish people in the desert. Bilam, who was possessed with true hatred for the Jewish people, said, yes, Pharaoh, it's a great idea. You should destroy them and destroy them as quickly as possible. Jethro, the future father-in-law of Moses, says, no, don't do anything to them, please. They're good people. Why? And then you had Job. What did Job say? Nothing. Nothing. He remained silent. And Talmud concludes, you see, when you remain silent in the face of evil, you become a partner of evil. And therefore he was punished. 3 storms. 3 storms that share a common denominator. They share a common denominator because they speak of 3 leaders who, by the way, received good scores in the Bible. Right? We're not speaking about pharaohs. We're not speaking about some minor, trivial person that history erased. We're speaking about 3 people who received good scores, but these people, when it counted most in history, decided to wave the white flag and give up, surrender. And they almost indirectly, therefore, caused the storm to arrive. And therefore, the Talmud concludes that if we truly wish to understand the art of leadership, we ought to understand it from these 3 characters. Because sometimes God throws us in moments in which we have to lead, against or in accordance with our will. And we have to step up to the plate and not be like Elijah's Jobs or Elijah Jobs? Jonas. Thank you. And I'm truly inspired by 2 contrasting stories. I don't know, some of you may remember, but on July 9th, 1982, it was a Friday morning, there was a man by the name of Michael Fagan. Remember the story? July 9th, 1982, by the way, was another tragic day in which a Pan Am flight off the shores of New Orleans crashed and killed 154 of its passengers, except for 1 lone baby who survived. That was that day. But Friday, July 9th, 1982, was a day in which Michael Fagan, a 31-year-old man who was mentally disturbed, stormed into the Buckingham Palace in London, England, Palace of the Queen, Queen Elizabeth II. And there he was able to truly, somehow miraculously break through all the barriers, and he found himself in the room of the Queen conversing with her. You remember that? Does anyone here remember? So, good. I don't. But I learned about it, read about it. But in 1982, then, in July 1982, the Queen is stunned as a stranger in my room, a mentally disturbed person. She is afraid, but somehow, just superhumanly, she's able to maintain a composure that would have made a great-grandmother very proud, because a great-grandmother, Queen Victoria, faced 7 assassination attempts and survived them all. But still, that composure would have made her proud. And she tries to speak to him and deviate his attention, and tells him to move out of the palace. She's there alone with him, but the man can't understand. She decides to pick the phone, and maybe they will hear the background noise of this man. Maybe they'll come and say, but nothing. She picks up the phone again to the security. This time she has a good idea, and she says, today I don't need fire for my cigarettes because I already have fire in the room. So she thought the security guards would understand the message, fire in the room. They would come running up, maybe there's some fire. But no, nothing. Nothing until a maid walked into the room of the Queen and was stunned. She said, whoa, what is he doing here? She immediately called security. They took him out, and thank God she wasn't touched. But there was a man in charge of the security of the palace. This man was a hero of World War II. In fact, he had trained for many years just to receive that position. A position of being in charge of the security of the Queen. The day after July 9, 1982, when he miserably failed, he was fired from his position. As one journalist put it, his entire life he trained for that moment. And when that moment came, he was nowhere to be found. Now contrast that with another famous story of Eddie Jacobson. As you may recall, on November 29, 1947, the United Nations voted positively that the state of Israel can indeed be established. Remember that? November 29th, there are streets in Israel. I remember living not too far away from a street called November 29th. I don't know if there are streets in America named after dates. No. I haven't seen any of that. But in Israel, it's quite telling. It's really quite telling that we name streets after dates. Beautiful. But November 29, 1947, the United States were for that establishment of the state of Israel. But then Harry Truman began to change his mind. He saw that the Palestinians were launching more and more violent attacks in the state of Israel, or in Palestine, what was named Palestine then, and he started having second thoughts. to the point that he decided that when time comes, on May 14, 1948, for that vote of the final establishment of the State of Israel, he would back out. The United States would not vote. Chaim Weizmann, who was the head of the Zionist movement, was beside himself. He needed the United States. He needed their support. Without the United States, Israel could not be established. He tried everything in the book, every single trick, but to no avail. Harry Truman would simply not be convinced. He had one trick left. He heard about a Jew named Eddie Jacobson, some of you may know, who was Harry Truman's business partner in the 1920s in Kansas City. They owned a store, a clothing store together. It was a shoe store also. And they were very close friends. In fact, Harry Truman and Eddie Jacobson began to form their friendships as they fought side by side during the First World War. And they then decided to open a business together, but that business failed. In fact, it went bankrupt. But they were such people of integrity and of honesty that instead of saying to the creditors, you know what, we're not paying you back, that's it. That's the law in the state, in this country, we don't have to pay you back. They took it, they said, no, we're going to pay back every single one of them. It took them 13 years to pay back every single one, but they eventually did. And they remained close friends. When Harry Truman was announced the president, Eddie Jacobson was welcome to the Oval Office whenever he wanted. That's how close they were. Chaim Weizmann, seeing that the United States would not back the state of Israel, he decides to call Eddie Jacobson and he says, look, you have to do me a favor. You have to go speak to your friend Harry Truman. As a Jew, this should be important to you. Convince him to support us. Eddie Jacobson says, but I made a deal with him that I can't speak to him politics. That's what our friendship is based on. It's not just storming to the Oval Office. He says, please, history is calling your name. History is calling your name. Eddie Jacobson says, fine. It was in March of 1948. He goes unannounced to the White House, knocks on the door of Harry Truman, sits down across his desk, says, Harry Truman, I'm here. Harry, my friend Harry, I'm here not for anything special between us today, but I'm here for a greater cause. I'm here for the cause of our nation, for the state of Israel. I need you to support it. Harry Truman was so livid that apparently, as Eddie Jacobson put it, he stood up that moment, his face was red, he had to walk to the porch to catch some fresh air, just to calm down. And he came back and he said, how dare you? You just broke our friendship. It was based on this loyalty, on this idea that we do not introduce politics to our conversation. What happened? Eddie Jacobson said, this is greater than me. It's for my people. Harry Truman says, fine, what do you want me to do? Eddie Jacobson says, just speak to Chaim Weizmann. You refused the meeting with him. Just speak to him. Eddie Jacobson had full faith in Chaim Weizmann, who was extremely charismatic, was very wise, one of the big scientists. Also, and he knew that Chaim Weizmann would be able to convince Harry Truman. That next day, Harry Truman, thanks to Eddie Jacobson, met with Chaim Weizmann. And he convinced him. And Chaim Weizmann changed his position. Here was a man again, who, as Chaim Weizmann told him, history was calling his name. And instead of being like that chief security officer at Buckingham Palace, he seized the moment, heeded the call, and truly became that ultimate leader that changed the course of our history. What a difference. Truly, what a difference. My friends, our palace is on fire. I know that it's uncomfortable to hear that, but we are on fire. The Jewish people are on fire wherever you go. Whether it's the fire of anti-Semitism attacking us now in Europe, even more so than before, or whether it's the assimilation from within that is also murdering us silently. 1.5 million Jews just in the past decade since the Holocaust have been lost to that sea of assimilation. And we are called to seize the moment, to be that queen, to be that Eddie Jacobson. Yes, history is calling each and every one of us here in this room. We can't just sleep. We can't just raise our hands. You may know the story of David Atchison. You know the story of Senator David Atchison, who in 1850 was asked to do something special, something I'm sure everyone here in this room would love to do. But you see, David Atchison faced a very peculiar situation. It was time for Zachary Taylor to become the President of the United States on March 4th, 1850. But the problem was that it was a problem. He was a devout Christian. And the ceremony of his presidency was due on a Sunday. Sunday being the Christian Sabbath, right? He said, I can't. I have to have it on Monday, the next day. Now his predecessor, James Polk, get quit office on Saturday. The United States can't be without a president from Saturday to Monday. What were they going to do? So they asked Senator David Atchison to take that place, becoming the president, for a day. For a day. It's a true story. You look it up. David Atchison was so joyous about the fact that he had to become president of the United States, as we will all be, that on Saturday he went out to party, to celebrate. He became completely drunk. He fell asleep on Sunday morning and woke up on Monday afternoon. This was the first time a president slept throughout his entire presidency. Literally. Literally. But sometimes we are asked also to be president. To be president. And it's in the everyday life. It's not just these big moments. The question, are we going to sleep through our presidency also? And I have to derive much wisdom and much inspiration from this week's portion, I have to say. This week's portion shares with us one of the most majestic moments in Jewish history, if you think about it. Here we are, a nation of slaves, finally celebrating freedom. We are marching towards the promised land, and we face an impossible situation. Red Sea is in front of us, remember that? The Egyptians are running after us, wanting to either kill us or bring us back to Egypt. And the Jews are stuck, literally stuck. What do? The Talmud speaks of the Jewish people splitting into 4 groups. 4 groups, by the way, that are very, very well found among us until today. One group said, what are we going to do? The Egyptians are running after us. The Red Sea, where are we going to go? So one group said, you know what, let's drown. Let's commit suicide. Let's not go back to Egypt. We suffer terribly there. And there's really no hope. We'll drown and commit suicide. That was one group. Another group said, no, let's surrender to the Egyptians. Surrender to the Egyptians, go back to Egypt, and we'll be what we'll be. A third group said, no, let's fight. Let's fight back. There's millions of us here, just over 2 million Jews who have left Egypt, maybe tens of thousands of Egyptian soldiers. We can overcome them. It's easy. Let's fight back. And the third group said, no, we're not going to drown. We're not going to surrender. We're not going to fight. Rather, we'll pray to God. God will save us. And they began to pray. And then God appears to Moses, and he says, I disagree with each and every one of these groups. The group that said, let's fight, I will fight for them. The group that said, surrender, no, believe in me. The group that said, pray, don't pray, move forward. The group that said, drown, also believe. Just move forward. The better Bnei Israel, Veisau in the words of the verse. Move forward. Don't start arguing. Now these 4 groups, as mentioned, I believe still exist among our nation as we face all of these attacks from within and from without, and we need leaders to speak that word of God of moving forward. See, the people who say, let's surrender. Let's surrender. In other words, let's conform ourselves. Let's be a little less Jewish. Let's be a little less proud. Yes, the state of Israel, but we can just call it another land. Yes, Judaism, but not so much. Some people will say, let's drown in the sea. What sea? These are the ultra-Orthodox, in my opinion. We'll drown in our sea, in the seas of our ghettos, in the sea of our Judaism, and forget about the world. We really don't need it. And there's a third group that says, no, we'll fight. It's the strength of our arm. Maybe a noble group. But let's post these messages on Facebook. Let's show a defiance. That's great. Good. But that's not enough. And then you have a fourth group that are the passive spiritualists, who say, yeah, it's happy-go-lucky, all be good, all we need is love. God says to move forward. First take pride in who you are before you fight. Fight, yes, but don't forget to move forward in your personal direction. Don't forget to move others forward as you are moving forward. Don't forget to grow. It's not enough to fight. That is the message that has to be sounded on top of mountains and in every city in which Jews are found. And again, these Jews can be each and every one of us. You may know the story, you may have read it. There's a YouTube about it. I saw it. It's quite moving. Of Arthur Rosenfeld, another Jew. That name sound ring a bell? Arthur Rosenfeld, very Jewish name, isn't it? Arthur Rosenfeld, in December of 2007, found himself in his little town in Florida. It was in Florida. And he woke up in the morning, and as he did every single morning, he went to the local drive-through Starbucks. And he ordered his coffee, and then behind him was a guy who was obviously very irritated, rude, nasty. And he started beeping, and he started shouting at the person in the Starbucks booth that your microphone is not working. I have to repeat myself 20 times. I've ordered here every single day, and now all of a sudden you can't hear me. You should unblock your ears. And he says, I'm sick and tired. He tells Arthur Rosenfeld, he beats him, just move forward. I want to get out of here. Arthur Rosenfeld can't move forward. There's a car in front of me. We've all been through drive-thrus, right? What are they going to do? He gets to the cashier, stolen his car, and he says to the lady, you just paid for his coffee. I'll pay for it. He takes out $10, and he says, yeah. It's for me and for the car behind me. Obviously, he's having a bad day. The woman can't believe it. She says, are you sure? Are you sure you want to pay for his coffee? And he says, yes, it happens to the best of us. He's just having a bad day. He's probably not like that all the time. But then she says to him, it's a little more than $10. He bought breakfast for 5 people. You sure you want to do that? And he says, yes. He takes out his credit card, pays for it. Then it's his turn. The lady says, you don't have to pay. The man before you, Arthur Rosenfeld, paid for it. The man was so touched, so moved, he burst into tears. And he said, if that's the case, I'll pay for the person behind me. And you can already imagine the person behind him paid for the person behind him. The person behind him paid for the person behind her. The person behind her, the person behind her, and him, and her, and him. And there was a whole chain of people that day that paid for each other's coffee, for each other's breakfast, whether it was for 5 people or for just one individual. Why? Because there was one Jew who listened to the moment that was presented in front of him, the moment in which he saw a fellow human being in pain. And he read the pain. He felt that the pain truly came from somewhere much deeper. And he heeded the call. He paid for it. Today, my friends, what we have to do, if we truly want to be those leaders, we have to take care of the car behind us. It could just be one person. Give him a hug, give her a smile, invite them to a class, invite them to Shabbat dinner, show them some love, some warmth. It's a bad time. We leave. That's the only way we can truly save ourselves in this burning palace. Because it is one. And I'm just reminded, and maybe I'll end with this, but I'm inspired by the story of a young couple. We all remember them tragically. This young couple married in 2002 in Israel, in the city of Afula. A year later, they had a baby boy. They named him Menachem, but unfortunately he had Isaacs. And very soon later, Isaacs is a terrible genetic disease in which a person becomes very quickly swollen and deaf and blind and eventually dies quickly. Actually he died. I think it's an Ashkenazic disease, a genetic disease, right? Right? Doctors among us, yeah. They didn't give up. She became pregnant again, her name was Rivka. and had a second baby boy. That boy, they named him Dov Bear. Unfortunately, he too had cancer. They had to give him up to a long-term care facility, also in Afula, Israel. They still didn't give up. They had a third boy, they named him Moshe. When Moshe was still very young, thank God, they discovered that he was healthy. Said, if he's healthy, it's time for us to move on with our lives. Let's move and become leaders of the Jewish people. These were people who could have very well said, we've had enough troubles in our lives, which they did. Let's sit back and relax and enjoy life. But no, instead they went perhaps the most deserted place on the Jewish map. They went to Mumbai, India. Hannah can tell you, she just came back from that. They went to Mumbai, India, to establish a Jewish center and serve every Jew, regardless of background, level of observance, and so on. In fact, I remember reading an Israeli journalist describing her experience at their Shabbat table. She wrote about how they loved everyone abundantly, and just in front of her on the Shabbat table, there were two Israelis just released from prison, and they treated them with the utmost dignity. Those were the people they were. Until December 2008. Some evil, brutal Pakistani terrorists stormed into the Jewish center, the Chabad house in Mumbai, and tortured them to death. As they were lying in their blood, their healthy son Moshe, their third son, started to shout. Sandra, he started to shout the name of their nanny. Sandra, who was below, on the floor below, not where the terrorists were torturing the bodies of her parents, below on the first floor, heard a name being shouted by Moshe, the 2-year-old. She went with tremendous self-sacrifice, ran upstairs, grabbed Moshe out of his crib, and stormed out of the building before the terrorists could even pay attention to her. Sandra had saved Moshe. The state of Israel welcomed her, welcomed Moshe. And the grandparents eventually adopted, the grandparents of Moshe eventually adopted him. There were two people who were so brutally murdered. But the death did not erase them. The death, in fact, I think enhanced their presence in many ways, because it showed us the model of true Jewish leaders. People like you and me. There was nothing too special about it. That just wanted to help, despite their suffering, despite their own circumstances. And again, they heeded the call. They went to Mumbai with tremendous self-sacrifice, gave of themselves for the Jewish people. Baruch Hashem, we won't be facing such hard situations. But every day, my friend, we have those opportunities to stand up, seize the moment, and be that person, be that leader. I'm reminded of one line, my favorite line in The Lion King, where Mufasa, remember that line? Where Mufasa, the older king, or the lion, tells Simba, this young, mischievous lion, that he has forgotten who he is. He tells Simba, you have forgotten who you are. You are a king, and it's time for you to take your place in that cycle of life. It's time for us to take our place in that cycle of Jewish history. That's who we are. We are kings, we are queens. And God is expecting us to be that leader, to be that Arthur Rosenfeld, to be that Eddie Jacobson, to be you. My friends, the time is now. So let us heed the call. I thank you. I'll take questions. Any questions that may pop in your minds, please feel free to ask them. And whatever it is, we can speak of Jonah, we can speak of... I have this deal just like Harry Truman and Eddie Jacobson that I don't speak politics. No, but I'll tell you this. My take is that I understand Netanyahu. I understand him. Whether he's right or wrong, I'll let you decide. But I understand that he has a burning desire, which every Jew should have, to save Israel from an existential threat. Right? So he feels that this is a moment in which he can influence the trend and really cause this uproar against Iran. I hope he can be successful. I understand where he's coming from. It certainly is coming from a quality of leadership. Whether the timing is right or wrong and so on, I'll let you decide. Better experts than me in that field. Yes?
Do you think the Jewish people in France should be staying or going?
I think, I'll tell you, that I almost wrote something about it, and then, I'll tell you, the Kotzker Rebbe said, this is a great line, one of the great Hasidic Rebbe said that whatever is thought doesn't necessarily have to be said. Whatever is said doesn't necessarily have to be written. Whatever is written is good for emails, by the way. We sometimes respond, text messages especially, sometimes respond just so abruptly. But whatever is thought does not necessarily have to be said. Whatever is said does not necessarily have to be written. Whatever is written does not necessarily have to be published. Whatever is published does not necessarily have to be read. But so that was my thinking. But I'll tell you this: I think it's an individual decision. I don't think that the Jews, and no one can speak for the Jews of France. The Jews of France are not one body. The Jews of France are multiple bodies, and that's a mistake we often make when we relate to the Jewish people. Jewish people are not just one body that can be easily moved. It's not one piece of wood. It's a symphony. You have a violin, and you have a piano, and you have a celloist, and everyone's different. So yes, for some people, maybe for the violinist in France, the state of Israel could be good. For the pianist, it might not. I think everyone has to make their own decision. No one can tell. I'm actually, speaking about Netanyahu, I disagree with him. I don't think every Jew now should make his aliyah. Every French Jew should make his aliyah. For some it's good, for some it's not. It's not one size fits all. It's great that we have the state of Israel. It's tremendously important that we have it. The Jews can feel safe and secure. But for some people, I have family in France. I tell you this, I spoke to my cousin just a week ago. Especially after the tragedy. I thought their stance would change, but they are very happy in France, very optimistic. They have their own circles of influence, and if they just uproot themselves and go to Israel, they'll be like a drop in the sea. Here, they need it. Here, they're in France, they can make a difference. That's the way they feel actually. So, people like that, I don't think Aliyah is the automatic solution. Yes?
One thing that bothers me about the young generation is that from what I hear, I don't think they relate to Judaism and Israel like some of my peers. And I was wondering if you can address that. I know some do, but from what I understand, and some of them from synagogues, without going into politics, but what should we do about that?
I have to disagree with you. That's number one. Look, the question is what do you mean by they don't relate to Judaism. I think the reason I'm in this business, put it this way, is because I'm a huge believer in the Jewish soul. I think sometimes the soul is connected to Judaism no matter what. The soul is one with Hashem, one with its Torah, one with its heritage. And sometimes the soul just needs to be ignited. Just takes a match to light a fire. But I'll quote the Lubavitcher Rebbe, blessed memory, who was once approached by one of the great philanthropists of our times, George Rohr. Some of you may have heard of him. But he talked today, organizes a minyan in his shul, KJ, Kehilat Yeshurun in New York City. A minyan for young professionals. And I don't know if you're familiar with it or not, but he's devoted to that minyan, and he's a big billionaire. Still is very much attentive to all these young professionals. And he was very proud of himself after one Yom Kippur in 1991, because he had 300 people show up to his minyan, 300 young professionals playing. That was a great achievement, which it was. And he went to Lubavitcher Rebbe to boast. And he said to him, you see it on video, and he said to him, I'm very proud to report that I had 300 people who have no connection whatsoever to their Judaism, no connection whatsoever to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, to their forefathers, show up at our minyan. Lubavitcher Rebbe, blessed memory, says, what? He praised himself. I'm very proud to report that I had 300 Jews who had no connection whatsoever to Judaism show up at my minyan. Again, he says, what? I'm happy to report, the third time, George Roy didn't get the message. He says to George Roy, he says, well, you should go and tell them and tell yourself that every Jew has an inherent connection to Judaism and to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. What do you mean, Jews that have no connection? That's not true. That's not true. I'll tell you a similar story. The chief rabbi of Israel, Rabbi Yisrael Meir Lau, Rabbi Lau, the father, not the son, who's also the chief rabbi now. But Rabbi Lau also came to the same leader, the Lubavitch Rebbe, and said, I'm establishing an organization for what's called in Israel, Kiruv Rechokim, bringing the far ones close. To which the Rebbe responded, and how do you know who's far and who's close in the eyes of God? So I think the young generation has that connection. It needs to be ignited. Thankfully for that, I think we have many young Jewish leaders. Some of them, I'm not young anymore, some of them are in our room. Right? We have the Moshe House, JNF Future, we have many, many beautiful organizations that are that match. A match that ignite a wonderful fire, that illuminate Phoenix in the world. Yes?
If I could just chavruta with Hannah a little bit and speak for that young generation, I think that the paradigm of leadership from our tradition that I can most relate this young community to is actually Moshe Rabbeinu.
Yeah.
He is the reluctant leader. Hashem comes to him a couple weeks ago in Parshat Shemot, and by my count 4 times tells him that he's going to lead the Jewish people. Moshe Rabbeinu is incredibly reluctant. I think that's putting it mildly.
Right.
And that's what I see in the Jewish community. In terms of young people, it's a reluctance. It's a part of their identity. It's not their entire identity. And to take that up and wave that flag is really making a statement. And I think the fear is that it's somehow masking and disguising who else that they are, what else that they are. And so I think that in addition to lighting the fire, igniting the spirit, which came to me through education, Jewish education, I think it's about just working through that reluctance and connecting to your Jewish identity in a way that speaks to you.
Yeah, I agree. And sometimes, I think the speaking about Moses, I think that reluctance is still very much there throughout his leadership. But his genius is that he stops to think about himself and focuses rather on the nation. And very often we also, it's not that I wake up every morning and sometimes I want to go back to sleep. Very often I want to go back to sleep. But despite the reluctance, these are the true leaders. These are really the true leaders. They're very human, but they become divine nonetheless.
And
yes, John.
if I could just add on, it should be noted that in a chavruta relationship, contradiction and disagreement is the biggest sign of respect.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Like, oh, yeah,
and I'm not saying Chana. I'm not saying, God forbid, that you. No. I'm not saying, but
you know what? I'm just talking from seeing some of my son is very connected in the whole thing, but
yeah.
I see what's going on with his friends. He's a kid. Well, anyway, we shouldn't.
Right. No, look, there is. I spoke about it. There's this wave of assimilation. No doubt.
I tried very hard, and
yeah.
it's kids that went to school with my son to Schechter, they're intermarrying, they're not raising children Jewish, and it bothers me. And I don't know, I'm so happy to see as many, a lot of young kids that come to that field, and of course I'm there, and the whole thing, and my son just lost, he's in town, he comes. But it just, when I see the other kids, I don't know, I'm not in their brains.
Yeah.
But, to them, having lunch and bagel on Sunday is being Jewish.
Right.
And it bothers me. So I'm hope.
Okay, that's why we need all Jewish leaders to step up.
Well, that's what I'm trying to extend with us to this area.
Yeah.
But
all right.
I just feel that it's a shame because, I talk to some of the young kids, they don't relate. Well, maybe I'm making a strong statement, but they don't relate to Israel. And even some of my Israeli friends that because it really bothers me. So, but I'm not going to take my dues back, don't worry. When they want, let me.
Well, let's see if you're a leader. Let's see if you can do it. I'm kidding. God forbid. We need you. Yes, Gevura.
Well, to me, I am so very excited about this area because I see so many groups of young people getting together and working to spread Judaism and keeping themselves connected with their people. Yes, they come to shul, but yes, they do their own thing. They lead. Moshe House is a wonderful, entity. JNF, I don't know, but hey, if you're pushing young people to Judaism, praise God.
Right.
And, so it's very exciting to see these kids.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm gonna conclude with this, unless there are any other comments or questions. But I'll conclude with this. That's a beautiful. There's a beautiful parable, and some of you some of you may know it. But about this young boy who was walking on the beach, and he saw thousands upon thousands of shellfish being thrown by the waves on the shore. And what he started doing, he started taking shellfish after shellfish and throwing them back in the sea to save them. This older man comes to him and says, don't you understand? There's thousands and thousands of shellfish. Your efforts are completely hopeless. To which the young boy responds, he takes the shellfish and he says to the old man, you see, to this shellfish, it makes the world of difference. And he throws him back in the sea. So we can face all these shellfish being thrown at us and perishing in the sea of assimilation and anti-Semitism. Or we can say, I'm going to be a leader. I'm going to take care of the car behind me, of one shellfish, because to that shellfish, whether it's young or old, far or close, that shellfish will make the world of difference. Okay? All right. Thank you.